I'd love to talk to you about the journey from dependence to independence to interdependence and what it may mean for you. So let's start at the beginning. Dependence. Now this may start with unconscious dependence. So for example, for a long time I took our electrical power supply pretty much completely for granted and didn't really pay any attention to just how dependent on other people we were for it. The first time I became acutely aware is when we had a prolonged power cut, and I realized that all I could do was hope that it came back on again soon. And as I've heard it said, hoping is not a strategy. So at that point I became consciously dependent. I was just aware that all of this was in somebody else's hands and not in my hands. For many people, you might be comfortable sitting there being consciously dependent. That's all fine. But I wasn't happy with that, especially being that I'm really interested in electrics. I thought, you know what? Stuff it. I'm going to become independent electrically. I'm going to take the house off grid. I'm going to install a lot of batteries and something called an inverter. And then I'm going to make sure that we've got power regardless of what's going on out there. Now, this was a good, interesting and necessary step along the way. And in doing that, I got a great sense of calmness in that the power was now within our hands, but also a little bit of nervousness, right? Because the power was in our hands. If something goes wrong, it becomes my problem, not somebody else's. I kind of like the idea that the moment the power goes down, somebody else is feverishly running around to fix it, and now I've got to fix it. It also felt, being off-grid, a little bit selfish. It's like, well, I've got solar and I've got this and the other, and I'm able to create my own power, but how about the person next door who's suffering during a power cut? So it's a little bit selfish and it's a little bit inefficient to be independent, for everybody to be independent in the example of power, but you could use water, food or whatever. Obviously, we're in a very globalized situation now where we all collaborate. We have our specializations and we do something somebody else either doesn't want to do or isn't as good at, and vice versa. So this is the fantastic shift to interdependence. But there's a big difference between just jumping straight into the society where everybody contributes and helps everybody else without having gone through the independent step. And the difference is you don't really realize what's involved in providing for yourself, and you're still potentially coming from a place of fear. Well, I certainly was with power. When it came to power, I was basically scared that I would lose it and that somebody else wouldn't resupply it. So I went and got my own. And that took away the fear. Now I'm like, I can supply it for myself, I can be independent, but I want to take it one step further, which is to reconnect to the grid, not undo my work, but add to it, reconnect back to the grid and become interdependent. So now we're in the great situation, and we'll be showing you in these videos precisely how to do this yourself if you choose to, but we're in the great situation where we can be off-grid if we choose, we can be on-grid, we can pull power from the grid, we can push power to the grid, we can kind of do what we like, and it's a much more relaxed and cooperative and collaborative situation than previously, where we're kind of hoarding the resources for ourselves as an independent, or I feel worse, completely unconsciously dependent on something from the outside. Now, of course, power is such an important building block in self-sufficiency because practically everything relies on power, from lighting and heating to computing to communication to water pumping, nearly everything. So for me, in the modern day and age, power is the baseline, and that's why I've started here, and that's why I think it's so important, and that's why I think it's really important, not just for yourself, but for the grids and the countries as a whole, that we become a little bit more independent, that there's a lot more what we call prosumers, which means that you are both a provider and a consumer of electricity. So give that some thought. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. My appeal here is to consider, firstly, what you're dependent upon and whether you're happy with that, at least be consciously dependent, where you could be more independent, whether it's food, energy, water, or any of the other SmartFew factors, and how, if you're already independent, you could become more interdependent. What could you give? Who could you collaborate with? Whether it's an allotment, a vegetable garden, your supply of water, your power, I don't mind, your services, your expertise, but let's discuss interdependence and how we can improve the world by all becoming more truly interdependent.